read an article recently that suggested that higher education would become the place that journalism would find its home the way research has in the past 20 years. So this is our first contribution.
Oh, thank you. We'll lose it.
I and others are really fascinated by the process of co-authoring and co-writing articles with someone else. To me, the writing is such a solitary process. Can you talk a bit about how you and Barbara did this? And because the writing is so elegant, so consistent, how did it work?
Well, actually, Barbara and I have a very similar writing style. And before she was my co-writer on this, she was my editor, and she had been an editor at the Daily News, but it was giving her ulcers, and she wanted to go back to being a reporter. But we just had a very similar writing style, and we wrote really well, and we wrote next to each other. So we would sit next to each other, and it was very collaborative. Like, I'd write a sentence, and then she'd say, we'd tweak it a little, and it wasn't difficult at all. And in fact, we're working on a book together, and we hope to get a book deal very soon. So that part of it was pretty much, it was easy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in where this story goes next. I mean, when I saw this whole set of articles and read them all at once, the first thing I thought is, this is a great television show. It's an HBO show. It's Cagney and Lacey meets Woodward and Bernstein meets the one. And so can you talk a little bit about how you take the story itself and then this process of what you're doing with it, the options that you had to go with the story?
Yeah, well, right after we won, we started getting all from not only literary agents and publishers, but also from movie and TV producers. Dick Wolf Productions was interested. We started having all of these surreal conversations with people in that industry. In fact, the day of the Pulitzers, we met with Anthony Edwards, who was in ER, and he was Goose from Top Gun, because he has his own production company, and he was interested in turning Tainted Justice into a TV show. The two characters would be two crazy suburban women with kids who go into the hood, so to speak, to go up against the police, and that was his idea. But we quickly learned that the best thing to do was to write a book and get a book proposal. We would have more ownership of the story that way, and then shop the rights to a TV show or a movie. So we're now going through that process, and we're really excited about it.
How do we as a public, who for so long have relied on the Fourth Estate for finding out the truth about things, now we live in a world in which, as you've said, the internet is filled with stories. These stories evolve and take on a life of their own in 30 seconds. One of the critical skills we try to teach is how do you discern the truth amidst all of these sources. So what's your advice for us?
Wow. It is tough. I mean, you see with the Tea Party movement that's primarily an internet-driven. That's a really good question. I would say that accuracy is still going to be valued. Fair, balanced reporting is still going to be valued, and you can find that even in news organizations that slant your way, whether you lean more liberally, more conservatively, or more in the middle. You can sort of weed out who's too much on the fringe and nutty, and who's really trying to give you accurate information.
Several people out there are very interested in the way that gender plays into this. Here are two women reporters doing this gritty crime story and very difficult neighborhoods that you were working in. Can you talk a little bit about women in journalism, and particularly as it relates to the types of stories you've done?
Right. Well, I think Barbara and I were the first print reporters, females, to win the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting, I think. And honestly, a lot of people ask us about that, and I think it really worked to our advantage because, we're both sort of unassuming, and we can both sort of play the ingenue, like, we don't know what we're doing. We're just asking some questions of some drug dealers, And because we're women, we come across very non-threatening and almost maternal. At one point, the FBI couldn't figure out how we were getting people to talk to us, and it was really as simple as being listening, being a good listener. Women are good listeners, I would hope most of them are, and being a maternal too. And so, but we had a lot of funny moments out there. Like one time we were looking for a specific drug informant who was kind of dangerous, so Barbara and I decided to go together on this one. And Barbara walks up to a corner of drug dealers, and she says, "Hi guys," and I was like, looked at her, and I just felt like bursting out laughing. I I think it did work to our advantage on this. Work it, women, work it!
Were you reading journalism when you were in college? What was inspiring you writing-wise then?
Well, I was at McDaniel. Well, I came from a newspaper family. My parents always subscribed to the paper. They always, I would always walk by their bedroom and see them reading the newspaper in bed. I read the newspaper in bed, much to Barbara Laker's horror, because I sleep over at her house when we write our book together, and she can't believe that's disgusting. You're going to get newsprint everywhere, But I come from a reading family, and certainly when I was at McDaniel, I wrote for the paper, and I took a lot of interest in the newspaper, and I encourage students to write for the paper if they're interested in journalism. Yeah, you can graduate with clips.
I'm sure many of the parents in the audience, particularly if their children are interested in journalism, are asking this question. So how will they earn a living?
Yeah, right.
What will be the way for a journalist to make a living?
I think that's a great question. I recommend that they go the online route, that they learn how to shoot and edit film, that they learn audio, that they learn multimedia. It's going to become very important, and journalists with those skills will be invaluable, and they'll be paid more, I believe, for those skills, and they'll be young. And learn a language if you have a language skill, Chinese, Spanish, you will be able to make more money. But journalism used to be primarily a blue-collar field, and part of the problem was it somehow became white-collar, and most of the people I work with, most of the journalists I work with make, a good, decent living, and they all have master's degrees and such, and so we sort of got away from thinking of ourselves as just like worker bees and expecting our salary to go ever higher.
Several folks wanted to know when you were here at McDaniel, talking about your favorite memories of things that you learned here, experiences that have really been influential to you. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, I remember I got cast. I think some people are laughing because I was a little bit of a rebel at Western Maryland. But I remember Ira Domser cast me in a play here, and it was, what was it called? I forget. See, it was so memorable, I can't even, yeah, what was it? But I remember walking up on this stage to practice for the first time and looking out into the lights and just feeling so energized and excited, and again, feeling like I was on Broadway, like I made the big time, And I had great professors. The professors, oh my gosh, I remember little details about the professors, like Ira Zett, who was a great teacher here. He had this question for the final, and the question was, why? So I went on and I spent like hours and hours and hours trying to explain why, using everything he had taught throughout the entire year. And some student, some like slacker student wrote, why not, walked out. And I came with an A. And that was a lesson I will never forget.
One of our parents, Nancy Marsh, wants to know, what would you have done differently in your educational career here in terms of preparing you for the work you do now?
Wow. That's a good question, because I really sucked this place dry. I took advantage of absolutely everything they had. I ran cross country. Anything I wanted to try, I just tried it. I used this place at like my personal lab to experiment with things, to go ahead and make a fool out of myself, to have a good time. I have no regrets at all. None at all. And I did end up going to graduate school, and I got some recommendations from the professors here, and I think that helped me get into graduate school.
Mm-hmm. Can you break into journalism without a graduate degree, or is that essential now?
Yeah, well, one of the problems that older journalists, and believe it or not, me being 40, that means I'm an older journalist now, considered. But we're having is that they're hiring young reporters right out of college. And these young reporters, they don't have the same institutional background, I guess, you need to cover City Hall, to cover, because I really started in the trenches, and I spent 20 years working my way up, and it took me 17 years to get to a major metropolitan paper. So you make the mistakes at the small paper and you never make them again. You learn the difference between the state legislature and the Congress, things that you wouldn't believe. Some people right out of college, they just don't have a grasp of how local government works, how state government works, how Washington works. And you need that foundation, and you also need to know where to get documents, and you learn that from the ground up. If I want to look at tax records, do I want to look at deeds, do I want to know what politician owns multiple homes in the city? This is all stuff that you can't learn in any classroom. You just got to get out there. So I find that they're hiring a lot of young and energetic reporters who need a lot of help.
Mm-hmm. Do you have one of these early on stories in which you made one of those kinds of mistakes and learned something from it journalistically?
It's funny because you make these little mistakes and you think of them as huge, but I was working for the Associated Press and there was a recall on nuts, and it was actually...
Did you say Congress? I'm sorry. Couldn't resist that.
You're hired! So yeah, they were having a recall on this fruits and nuts, and I guess I messed up. I said that it was being recalled by the federal agricultural department, and it was actually state. And then I had to write a memo about why I made this mistake, why it would never happen again. I had to meet with my bosses and explain it. I mean, it was the most humiliating thing. It went in my file. I'll never forget it. This was like years ago. Fruits and nuts, a recall. It kept me up at night.
You alluded earlier in your remarks today about this feeling that a lot of people had. These are drug dealers. I mean, we need them off the streets. Justice was served. The heck with the ethics of it all. And the fascinating thing I found in reading the whole series is this interplay between what is justice, who are victims. Can you talk a little bit about what you think you've learned in that process of covering this story?
It's really tricky. Like, one of the stories we wrote ended up letting out a huge drug dealer named Pooh Bear. I mean, he was just so bad, and the neighborhood was, I mean, I guess he had decimated his neighborhood, and the feds had to let him go. They had no choice but to let him out of prison. And it kept me up at night. I felt bad about it. I have kids. I'm glad they don't live in a bad neighborhood in Philadelphia, but it certainly weighed on my conscience. And even when we were going through the bodega owners, like the shop owners, of who we were going to feature and who we were not, maybe this is unethical, but we tried to stay away from shop owners telling their story who, yeah, they got busted, but they also had a legal gun in their store or something like that. Like, we tried to separate like the true victims from people who got swept up into it because of the lives they were leading. But then again, I really was committed to the belief that just police officers, just like journalists, they have to play by the rules, or else it ruins things for everybody. It just erodes the entire institution of law enforcement and journalism. I'm very committed to that idea, so I'm sort of unwavering. And so when we did get a lot of criticism from the Fraternal Order of Police, it really didn't bother me at all. I don't know why, it just didn't bother me. I just felt so that we were right.
Give us at McDaniel some advice. How can we better prepare our students for the world that we're living in now?
I would encourage them to embrace languages here, to travel if they have an opportunity to travel. This college is very nurturing. One of the reasons is it's small, the faculty is very accessible, but to just make sure that the students are aware of they're getting this great liberal arts education, but they're also dipping their toes into worlds far and wide away, so they're not so shell-shocked when they get out that there is a bigger world out there. And when you
But you became an editor and you became a great writer, and we're incredibly proud of you. And I know everybody here wants to thank you for what you've done for us and the stories that you've told, the people's lives you've changed in Philadelphia. So if you could join me in congratulating